Hello, everyone. I'm Charlie, and welcome back to another DraftKings DFS Slate breakdown. We are now in the end game, of the European soccer season. We've got semifinals now, Champions League, Premier League's got 4 or 5 match weeks left. So we're approaching the end here. It's exciting. Now we've kind of gotten down to only showdowns in Champions League now, with one semifinal on Tuesday, one on Wednesday. We're here to break down this Tuesday game with Arsenal and PSG. In terms of odds, Arsenal are a slight favorites because of that home field advantage, I'm sure. And let's just get straight into it here. In terms of our goal scoring, I'm looking at the to score or give assist props instead. I think it just makes a little bit more sense for us for our DFS purposes. Saka is the leading favorite here at plus 130, followed by Dembele, Martinelli. Like everyone's kind of similar. Like Saka's the favorite, but not by a ton. This shows that there's no kind of big guy that I think really needs that is kind of like a Holland type that just is more likely to score than anyone else. It's kind of even across the board here. But I think it makes for a super interesting slate for DFS. A lot of ways to go. Like all these guys are just kind of in the similar ballparks, and all are pretty decent plays. Except got the guys who have no chance of playing, like Butler, Oyedeji, and Ramos, who just will not start. It's interesting to see nonetheless. Like your Sakas, your Dembele's, Martinelli's, Kvaratskhelia, even Odegaard is not that far off. So yeah, like I said, tons of places to go, and like these goal contribution stats, I think are largely a wash here. And in terms of our projected lineup and set pieces for Arsenal, it should be Rice and Saka splitting. Odegaard maybe has an outside chance of taking something as well. And PSG are just a team that you cannot play for sets whatsoever. Like they switch up all the time. I think a week ago it was like Nuno Mendes taking mostly. Last game was Doué, like almost taking everything. And then I think Kvaratskhelia took a one off or two. Same with Dembele. So they're just complete mess. I kind of hope we see like a Barcola start over Douay just because it's one less guy who can take. But otherwise, like I said, I think Hakimi even had a corner last game too. It's just completely unpredictable. They don't cross all their corners anyway. I think Douay had more corners taken than crosses, which is kind of crazy considering you can get open play crosses too, which is not a good look for them. They're not a team that crosses the ball a ton. You're kind of hoping more for just raw points from them, whether that be foul drawings, shots. You can't really count on them for set pieces. Like I'll use Kvaratskhelia here as an example as we get into pricing here. Like he had one really good cross game. Otherwise, like what, 2 or 3 a game, and he still puts up solid floor a lot of the time, like 13, 15 here against Liverpool both games. So yeah, like PSG will still have floor despite not being a crossing team. And that makes for an interesting slate here. This is a little bit different than my usual videos because this is a showdown, of course. So, of course, got that captain slot to think about too. But first, let's just go player by player here, and then we'll talk about different maybe game script strategies where I think it's a super big edge in showdown game scripting. But like I said, first we'll just get down to each player. Dembele, I love. Saka, I love. Like these are just obvious picks for me, of course, just because they're just great guys in terms of floor, in terms of upside. They've both been phenomenal almost the entire run through Champions League for both teams, Dembele especially, but even Saka, like just super solid floor here. I will have both of these guys in a ton of builds together. Probably like 80% of my teams will probably have both, or maybe that's too high. Like maybe 75% of my teams will have both of them, and I say 100%. I think I'll have one or the other in every build. Kvaratskhelia I love too. Like I'm gonna be very tempted just to cram Dembele, Saka, Kvaratskhelia in cash almost certainly, and then in a ton of GPP builds as well. I love all three of those guys. Trossard, being more of a differential for GPP, I'll have a sprinkle there, but not a cash play for me. Martinelli, same thing. Lee Kane, I just think will not play. Marino's questionable, interestingly enough. Chance of playing. I feel like he'll be good to go. He is in projected right now. We will see with him. Rice, I think Rice might get a little bit overlooked here because people are going to gravitate towards these flashy wingers. Dembele, Saka, Kvaratskhelia, I talked about already. It's hard to cram those three and Rice together. I know Rice was awesome in that first leg against Real Madrid, but he was just okay. Second leg, I know that it was just completely Real Madrid flow because of the huge Arsenal lead, but still, like a 10-point floor, I just feel like there's probably not going to be enough here. especially if we're to believe like the goal scoring odds here. I think are super high. I think it's like minus 200 for both teams to score. A pretty high goal total as well. And Declan Rice, despite those 2 goals, like I said, he's just not normally a goal contribution guy. He's gotten 6 in UCL, which is kind of crazy. Like I don't think that's that sustainable for a player in his position, especially if we see him in this role where he's like got no defensive mid behind him. There's no Partey, there's no Jorginho. He's going to be the deepest guy a lot of the time. And that's just a huge difference. Like he's not going to be like your Marino role, who's going to be attacking at times and kind of being that late ball crasher. He's like another man who basically will just turn into an attacker when they have the ball. Like he's going to be the deepest guy in terms of like these midfielders. So like that worries me a tiny bit if we see a lineup like that. Makes me a little bit scared. But if like Jorginho's in or something, someone who's going to sit back a little bit more, I'd be a little bit more tempted. But in this role, like I'm not going to have a ton of Declan Rice here. I probably won't even have him in my cash build. I think just a little bit of a kind of not enough upside play on this slate to where there could be a ton of goals. Odegaard, I like him if there's no Saka starting. Saka's going to play though. Even then, like he just doesn't get enough goal contributions for me. And without set pieces, he doesn't really warrant this price. I'll have a share, like maybe an Arsenal stack or maybe a GPP differential. Like maybe I will build without Saka with Odegaard in it, just in case maybe Saka gets subbed early or maybe he gets injured or something. That's just a game script scenario that I could see happening where Odegaard makes sense. That's where I once again emphasize how much game scripting matters in Showdown. Each build kind of tells a story I've heard before. That's completely correct. In soccer especially, just because like it's hard to predict who will do well in soccer. Like there's so much variance. What you can do is predict how a potential path the game could go in a GPP build. Like in cash is the way I look at it, I think there's more edge in GPP Showdown than there is in GPP Classic. I think it's the opposite for when I say GPP, I mean Classic versus Showdown. There's more edge in GPP Showdown in terms of game scripting, in terms of leaving salary on the table, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end as well. Classic, I think it can be a little bit of lottery at times, especially in your bigger GPPs. Just because like most of the times you're filling your salary and like I opened the wrong tab, but most of the times you're filling up your salary in Classic in like every build or near every build. In Instant Showdown, yeah, like I said, when to get different, you just need to leave some salary on the table, and that makes it a lot less duped automatically. Which is what people complain about in these Showdown PvPs, just because of the dupe rates. Which I'll accept. Like I'll have builds that end up kind of chalky, but like as a guy who like maxes GPPs, like I will have plenty of builds where I leave a ton of salary on the table. And I think that makes sense more to do if you're like a single bullet guy rather than a GPP maxer. Like guys like me will have a ton of builds that'll cover most of the obvious scenarios, and you can only do like one if you're like a single bulleter, which is another thing about contest selection. That's just a whole other thing, and I kind of want to keep this a little bit more concise than that. And what are I for price? Due 7,400. I'll be a little bit tempted by Hakimi at 7K. I really like that a lot. I like him more than Declan Rice. He's got a little bit more of a solid floor to him, a little more upside too, which is strange considering he's a fullback and Declan Rice is a midfielder. But if Declan Rice is in that number 6 position, like we saw in the projected lineup, I'd rather have Hakimi for 1K cheaper for sure. So Hakimi, I like a lot here. Barco Lofty starts over Due. Just a cheaper alternative there. The goalkeepers always a super interesting thing in Showdown, especially with your cash builds. They always end up decent owned, and there's just so much variance in the keeper position. I always talk about in Classic and Showdown. It's even worse just because they're coming with a little bit more ownership, and it's not like everyone has to play them. Like there's such a huge disparity between whether they do well or not. Like goal given up, you're likely negative points. They don't give a goal, they have suddenly have like 15. It's kind of like a goal dependent attacker. That's the way I kind of look at goalkeepers, especially on a slate like this where the game is pretty even. It's not like you're gonna have like a flow where like your dog keeper is going to have maybe a bit of a floor in saves potentially. In these games, like maybe a goalkeeper does make a ton of saves, but it's hard to tell. A first goal means a ton in these kind of games. It's just super hard to predict. It's whether you want to take that risk or not. I will have plenty of shares in GPP, but I accept that a lot of the time, like I'll do a ton of like goalkeeper captain builds just because of the variance of the goalkeeper position. Like if they keep a clean sheet, that's like a 6K attacker who scored a goal basically, just because they're guaranteed minimum 10 points plus a couple saves in there. And at this price, it's payoff for sure. It's just whether they drop negative or not. And you're just accepting that that might happen in GPP. You're kind of happy getting either way up there, like first, or super high up in the standings, or like super low. There's no point going for a min cash. Like, you're kind of going out swinging in GPP, and that's why I think goalkeepers make a lot of sense. And they're either a little bit scary in cash because of those variance to that position. Nuno Mendes at 5,600, I'm going to be kind of tempted by as well. We'll see how he fits. Like I said, I like Kvaratskhelia. I like Dembele, I like Saka. Those guys don't leave a ton of salary left over. And if I want to go Hakimi too, that's just not a ton left over to work with. And Nuno Mendes maybe gets left out in the cold a little bit in my build potentially because of that. But also depends on my captain choice as well. We haven't really committed to. Then we get to Donnarumma, super cheap. Like, I could see that tempting just because he's more of a value play over Araya. And then in terms of guys way down here, if Ben White starts, I think that's a pretty intriguing option at 3,400. These center backs, I'll confess, I probably get pretty underweight on center backs in most showdowns just because I just don't think they're worth a hassle. Just because, yes, they could score, but even then, it happens so little. Like, I'll maybe have like one or two builds with the goalkeeper. I usually pair him, or a center back. I mean, I usually pair him with a goalkeeper, hoping for maybe a 1-0 with the center back scoring. Otherwise, I never really do many like both teams to score center back builds in my GBP exposure, just because it's just such a hassle. That's just so many more outcomes that you have to kind of predict. And I like to just do the most likely, like I said, because I'm a guy who's maxing GPP. I'm going to just try to cover the obvious, and if I lose to like crazy stuff like that, I accept it. And like, if I was a single bowler, I'd maybe think the opposite. I'd be more inclined to play like the center back. So it depends on your strategy, how many builds you're doing. Really, you should think about that when you're making your PvP lineups for showdowns. All right, those are the prices. I was going to talk about a little bit about PvP strategy and kind of showdown strategy in general, but I think I've kind of done that as I've gone on. So I guess we'll first next look at a couple of builds, just for a core. Like, if you're captaining, like, say Dembele's the most expensive guy, like a Dembele, Saka, Kvaratskhelia. Doesn't give you a ton of work with throwing Hakimi there. I don't even know if that's affordable. That is just, but it's going to get really gross down there. So yeah, I think captain is a huge thing here. Like I said, in terms of a core for cash, I'm jamming these guys. We'll see how it shakes out. I like to cram in Hakimi. We'll see how that works. Maybe get like some value. Like I said, if Ben White starts, he doesn't, makes it a little bit tougher. We'll see. But yeah, that's what I do for a core. I don't know a ton to add. I feel like I kind of talked about it as I went through pricing in terms of strategy. To be like, showdown's just a strange beast. But yeah, guys, that'll be it, I think. Good luck, and I'll see you for the next one. Peace.